Hello, hello. I hope everyone can hear me. If you're here, feel free to put a comment in the chat. If you're on YouTube or Twitter, hello. If not, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome back to Friday Office Hour. I am Dr. Sunshine, and this Friday Office Hour is part of my online community called Under the Hood. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is a space for aspiring, current, or retired STEM students and professionals. This is also a space where the friends and the family members of STEM folks can hear the firsthand accounts and about the behind the scenes experiences of those people that you care for who have decided to dedicate themselves to careers in STEM. And as any of us know, that can be a very difficult journey. It can be a trying journey. Either way, it's good for us to have a space to convene. Okay, and like I said in the last live stream, you can actually remain pretty anonymous on YouTube if your username is an alias. So don't be shy about hitting the thumbs up button, submitting a comment, etc. But obviously if your name is in your username, I'll know who you are. If you are watching from Twitter, I don't know and I can't see, but feel free to jump on over to the YouTube app so that you can interact with me live and ask questions in the YouTube chat. Once again, as a disclaimer, if you have a Title IX situation, please do not submit those questions through this venue because the work that I do for Under the Hood is covered under Title IX. So you need to make sure that you go through the proper channels on your campus if you're having those types of issues. One more disclaimer, the views that I express on this platform do not reflect that of any of the institutions that I was formerly affiliated with and that I'm affiliated with now. Alrighty. So as I advertised, we're going to talk about undergraduate research today before I get into the questions that I received through the pre-submission portal. Okay. So today we're going to talk about undergraduate research, right? I felt like this is a good topic for the live stream so that you can perhaps ask questions on the fly. So I am a big proponent of undergraduate research, especially if you are on the graduate research track, okay? So if you plan to attend graduate school, it's really, really helpful to have an experience where you're working directly with a PI, or you have gone through a more intensive summer research experience. What these opportunities allow you to do is break down any barriers to engagement, and it reduces the amount of unknowns when it comes to research. So you're not so much worried about, will I fit into this space? Can I do this? Am I even good enough to do research? You can actually work those things out as an undergraduate researcher. So one program that comes to mind readily as an intensive summer experience is the NASA Student Airborne Research Program, or SARP. So every summer, the SARP program, or SARP, hosts a number of undergraduate students that go and they are able to work with an advisor, work on a project, and they get to have experience with flight campaigns. So airborne research, that seeks to take samples of the air within the boundary layer. And sometimes, maybe not for SARP, but other flight campaigns usually do ascents and descents a bit higher above the boundary layer. But maybe I'll have a SARP student to speak to you all at some point in the Under the Hood platform. I want to mention that I actually started my career as an undergraduate researcher, right, at Georgia Tech. I will say I did do some undergraduate research at Fort Valley State University. It is a historically Black college and university. I did some work under my math professor, Professor Zhu. And so at Georgia Tech, I asked for a research for credit option. So since I was a 3-2 transfer student, meaning I did 3 years at Fort Valley and 2 years at Georgia Tech, to receive 2 bachelor's degrees. So it was a dual bachelor's program that may still be pretty active. It's called the CDEP program. I actually wanted to take research for credits. It's a 3-hour class so that I could get done with my degree requirements a little bit less intensively, because after about 4 years of dual degree schedule, you're pretty burnt out. And it was then that I met who would turn into my graduate advisor, Dr. Ted Russell. And let me tell you how I chose to work under Dr. Russell. I took a class from him called Civil Engineering Systems, and I just found him to be a delightful person. Okay. I really didn't know what his research was about, but he delivered the mathematical part of the lecture in a way that resonated with me as a math major. I said, okay, whatever this man is doing, I just want to do it for research for credit. So I went to office hour, or I approached Ted over the summer. I was like, Ted, do you have any spots for undergrads? And I'll never forget. He's like, yeah, maybe. He goes, do you know what an eigenvector is? I say, yeah, I've heard of it. I'm a math major. Do you know what an eigenvalue is? Go, yeah, I know what that is. And then he was taken aback because most people don't know what those are. And I'll need to go do some reading to refresh myself on those calculations. But then he asked me, would you prefer to work in the lab or go out in the field? Or do you want to do work on the computer? I said computer. I didn't like being outside in the Georgia summer. It was hot and you get really sweaty. So that is literally how my career started. To this day, I am an air quality researcher doing computational modeling work. So really the decisions you make as an undergraduate can, inform your future, but you can also pivot. So that's how I got started. I really enjoyed the research for credit experience. Unfortunately, I had to take a step back in my master's for some financial reasons, but I did circle back and obviously start my PhD. The other thing I want to mention is that, or I want to reiterate that I really support undergraduate research because it can really be a turning point for students in their careers and just overall development. And so I have mentored about 25 plus undergraduate researchers, whether through field campaigns, whether through helping them apply to grad school, just bouncing ideas about the research they're doing in someone else's lab, community engagement, etc. And personally, I try to make sure that the undergraduate students that work in my lab, I try to make sure that they get something published. So some sort of research outcome or output that they can list on their resume, especially those students that may have graduate research prospects. I also really think it's important for undergraduates to apply for external research fellowships. While not everyone, has the motivation to do research for credit, you may be motivated to do undergraduate research if there's a stipend associated with that. So there's tons of programs to fund undergraduate research. And so with that, I'm going to share some slides that I put together for a SACNAS presentation at UCR. So some of you may recognize the UCR logo. So I got this article of maybe going on a couple years ago from the UC Davis blog about undergrad experiences. And so these are the top 5 reasons why undergraduates should do research. And so number 1 is to explore career directions. This is the obvious one. If your family is pushing you to go into medicine and you have the itch to be an engineer, you can take a summer internship or summer research position in an engineering lab, right? If you want to do robotics, you can go work in a robotics lab to see whether or not the passion is there and is strong enough for you to go up against your family and truly convince them that medicine is not for you. This second reason, building transferable skills and enhancing your resume. This is a big one for me. I think that any lab that you join, if it's a good experience, you're going to walk away with a ton of transferable skills. Transferable means that how well you got at doing a certain research task, data analysis skill set, if you learn to code in your undergraduate research experience, when you get ready to go and join a different discipline or get a job, you've already learned how to do those things. And while it's in a different context, you'll know how to do it. For instance, the online teaching that we had to do during COVID is much like running a podcast. I kid you guys not. I'm like, this is the same thing I did. Okay. Except there's no like nice backgrounds from the Webb telescope on the lectures, unfortunately. But things that I learned from engaging online, I am going to take it back to the classroom to make it a little bit more interesting. So you learn skills, but it's used for different contexts. And I really, really think that's a big one for undergraduate research. Enhancing your resume. Obviously, having evidence that you've worked in a lab, worked as a team, worked independently looks great on your resume. The next thing, learning to publicly advocate for and defend work. Yeah, this is a big one. So those of you that are like in your undergrad, you haven't done research, what do they mean by publicly advocate? Well, not in every instance will you have a supportive audience who's listening to what you're saying about your research. Number 1, your research is new, it's new knowledge, new findings, and it may be slow. People may be slow to adopt those ideals. So it'll be your job to stand up in front of them and talk about your research in a way that is convincing, compelling, and factual. And that is how you publicly advocate for your work. Defending your work. Excuse me. So, defending your work. As a graduate student, you'll have to go through a series of oral examinations where you are um, you're letting your committee know that what you're doing is worth your time and it's worth the resources that are being invested in you by your advisor and by the institution. So if you have an undergraduate research advisor that encourages you to speak in front of the research group, go off and do poster presentations, and even give presentations at technical meetings, which is possible. This is where you can put into practice defending your work. Getting a leg up on graduate or professional school. This is a big one for obvious reasons. You're building your resume. If you're sitting in a lab as an undergrad, you begin to see the flow, the day-to-day from other graduate students, and you learn how to speak research. So there's a certain way we communicate with each other. There's a certain etiquette we use to communicate with each other via email. How do I address my advisor? Do they prefer a first name basis? Always just start with their professional title, Professor so-and-so, and they will correct you. If you feel like you aren't receiving feedback or responses to your emails, if you're using first names before you've even met these professors, they're probably not going to answer. You'll get exposure to fellowships and just all kinds of wonderful just experiences with collaborative settings, right? I find that in my experience, the research setting is more comfortable than the corporate setting. It's more laid back, and that'll get you used to being amongst your peers. It'll also get you used to moderating your behavior. So obviously, a research lab can be a low risk, high reward setting to moderate your behavior or learn how to code switch. I'm sorry. So my BIPOC, my marginalized community, we know what code switching is. It's where kind of you put maybe your provincial, your slang to the side, and you just communicate in a way that translates across all cultures and things like that. Yes, I am code switching right now. I am from the South. I'm an Atlanta native from the South. I have an accent if I don't try. Or if, I'm upset. So you kind of learn how to, you can still be your authentic self, but you don't have to bring your full, home dialogue, the way you speak to the research environment. You got to remember that there are international people that you'll be working with. And it's funny, as a professor, it dawned on me, or I learned about how many idioms or sayings and slang there is in the US language. Like, a bird in the hand is better than two birds in the hand is one in the bush, or something like that. Or we say a lot of things that don't mean what they mean. And when you're talking to an international audience, it doesn't translate. So that's something else that you learn when you're doing undergraduate research, right? If you're in the chat, you can put some of those idioms down there that we say in America that they just simply don't translate. Last but not least, contributing knowledge and impacting the world. Okay, yeah. Whether you're doing something that is what we call incremental, or like small advances that will eventually lead to bigger advances, or you're working on CRISPR and gene editing and cancer research, you're contributing to the increase in a body of knowledge that is meant to be helpful. What I've learned from working with community organizers is that you may not actually see or be living to experience the benefit that will come from the work that you've done. But you do it anyway because you know generations to come will benefit. And that's kind of how research works. You may not see, um, you may be working or entering into a project midway and you only have a semester to contribute, but your contributions could be significant enough that it changes the direction of the entire project. And maybe you've graduated and then you contact your advisor a couple years later and they're like, yeah, we actually got a patent for that work. Now, if they got a patent on work that you contributed to significantly, they should probably put you as an author on that patent. But you can check out my Hidden Research Taxes podcast about how sometimes we get erased from our own work. Okay. All right. And so this is a list that I compiled for the SACNAS audience at UCR. We were in the deep part of quarantine, and so I had some strategies that worked when you're in person, which is the pre-COVID. And although we are still in COVID times, you can use some of these pre-COVID strategies if you're doing some in-person research right now. And then on the right are the post-COVID or the virtual engagement strategies. So I'm just going to run through these really quickly. For pre-COVID, number one, go to the faculty web pages. So if you're in a department or if you want to do research outside of your department, go to the PI's website, especially the ones that you're interested in. Look around their website, read the research description and see if it interests you, see if it sparks joy. I would narrow your choice down to hopefully one, but if not, two professors. And so if you end up liking more than one area, I recommend doing 3 through number 6 for both of them. So once you've narrowed down to 1 or 2 people, I recommend going to their publication list. And if their publication list on the website isn't updated, go to Google Scholar and look at their profile, sort by year, and look at the papers that they have made major contributions to within the last 2 or 3 years to get familiar with what official outcomes from their group look like. Is it mainly mathematical? Do you see a lot of equations? Are there a lot of nice graphics about cell lines and cell cultures? That gives you an idea of what you'll have to do to produce outputs as part of that lab. Then I recommend after you've done your homework, because the more you know about the professor, the more tailored your email will be. And like I said, for the faculty search, it's really easy to see or tell when an email is overgeneralized, where you're blessing your undergraduate research request out to multiple people. There's just key signals when someone has read deep into your website. Like they're telling you about a presentation you made 3 years ago. One young lady in my group, I won't put you out there, but she's like, yes, I saw that you taught in Shanghai. Yo, this was in 2017. And I looked at her, I said, you've done your homework. I couldn't believe she knew that, but it meant she went to the website and she actually pulled my CV. Okay. I'm very impressed by her. And of course, I am mentoring her in my lab right now. She's doing a fantastic job. All right. So email your professor a tailored email that expressed genuine interest. And if you aren't able to get them a response, figure out when their office hour is. It may be posted on the outside of their door. If you're taking a class from them, you'll obviously know when the office hour is. This is a good time to talk about any interest you have in undergraduate research and joining their lab. During this time, let them know that, hey, I'd like to talk about undergrad research. Can we talk about what those expectations would be? Am I required to spend a certain number of hours in the lab every week, in the office every week? Can I work from home? Is this a hybrid situation? Is there opportunity for pay? Do I work directly under a graduate student, et cetera, et cetera? Speaking of grad students, I know that's listed on post-COVID, but if you want to get more information on what it's like to work under that faculty member, definitely reach out to one of their graduate students, or even knock on the door where their desks and offices are and ask if you can have a one-on-one for about 15 minutes. All right. And so once you've done your reconnaissance, you've talked to people, you've sent the interest email, make an informed decision, and figure out whether it's something you want to do, because you'll want to make a commitment. Okay. So committing to undergraduate research is also a transferable skill. It means you can make a decision and follow through with it. Now, I understand things come up, research isn't your speed, and you need to drop out. But being committed to an undergraduate research position that is unpaid and sometimes unrewarded shows incredible fortitude. All right. And so once you've decided, hey, this is the lab I want to join, definitely ask about group meetings and one-on-one meetings. And if there's a group meeting, attend. Do attend the group meeting. This is really critical for you to build camaraderie with the other people in the group. You get to know the group dynamic, and you can actually, feel the energy and see whether or not it's a place you want to be. And if the advisor, requires an individual meeting, be sure to do that as well. So the right-hand side of this slide is about post-COVID, or if you're working in a virtual environment or totally virtual, these are things that you can do. Write an interest statement, right? If you have a half-page, full-page statement that you can send to the faculty member, this may grab their attention. If they're inundated with email, if they are actually overwhelmed with their responsibilities in a completely virtual world, this could signify to them this person is serious. The professor can evaluate your writing skills, and they can perceive your research maturity if they get an interest statement from you. So this is similar to something you'd write for a research fellowship. So when we were virtual, I actually recommended to a couple students, if you can't be in the lab, you can offer to do literature reviews for the advisor and for their grad students. This is something that would help you build incredible transferable skills, right? You learn how to source out information, read and digest highly technical and complex information, and then synthesize it and write about it. That's really helpful for any job, I think. And so if you're feeling like you're not getting a solid research experience because it was virtual, at least you'll have the written and synthesis experience that comes along with doing research as an undergraduate. The other thing, if you're in a completely virtual environment, or maybe you are wanting to engage with a group that is international or separated by water, you can offer to help with data processing. What this means is cleaning data, taking data out of off of an instrument, and filling in gap filling, like putting in nans or -9999 for missing data, transferring data from a weird instrument format to CSV. This data cleaning and data formatting could be really, really clutch and really helpful for a graduate student that is in the lab generating those data, and maybe they just want to focus on generation and focus on analysis, and that step to clean the data up is just like time sink, and it's really hard, and it's not really contributing to the graduate students' overall traineeship. But it's good for you to get the experience up front so that you know what to expect when you become a graduate researcher. So I think that would really be appreciated by anybody. So you can offer to assist with this. I personally would give this either authorship or an acknowledgement if a paper comes out of it. It just depends on how much further you went beyond just doing the data cleaning. if you actually made useful suggestions about how to analyze those data, I mean, that's an intellectual contribution that may warrant an authorship. So you can think about your research as service as like a getting your feet wet, which may actually turn into significant research outcome. All right. Once again, if you're completely virtual, the lab you want to join is actually international and it's really far away. You can reach out to a graduate student from that group and figure out what the group dynamic is. Does the lab accept undergraduate researchers, and how they are enjoying their experience? Okay. So that's really all I have for undergraduate research. I think my students have enjoyed their experience. A couple of them have published either in a journal or they've helped with technical reports. Okay. So that ends the discussion about undergraduate research. If you're in YouTube, feel free to drop a comment if I skipped over anything that you find important. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to do is answer the questions that came in through the form. I will drop the link to the form in the chat. Honestly, it's not, it's a little bit unnimble at the moment, so it's in the description box, I believe. So this first question is from a person in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And the question reads, how do you navigate a PhD advisor who doesn't have time to provide feedback on papers and grants, about 3 to 6 months of no feedback, is consistently late with deadlines for programs that I'm applying to, and doesn't offer guidance on developing research questions? I'm a first-gen doctoral student, so I'm unsure how much I'm supposed to determine on my own. Is this typical, or am I experiencing some form of neglect? All right. So for those of you that are curious, I've already reached out to this submitter because this is a pretty urgent issue in my opinion, but I told the person that I would talk about it here online as well for those of you that may be going through something similar. So the advisor really doesn't give feedback. It's not assisting with developing research questions. There are about 2 to 3 red flags in this question that prompted me to recommend that this student try to find a co-advisor or just find another advisor, period. I don't know where the person is in their PhD journey, but it is never too late to find another sponsor. So for those of you that are going through something like this in your first year, it's a little less risky to change your advisor. Before you make any moves, you should definitely contact the graduate office, the grad advisor, to let them know that you may want to change advisors. Okay, and they'll help you with the paperwork. They may be able to pair you up with someone else. If there is an office on campus that services minority, women, LGBT needs at the graduate level, you can also go and talk to them about what they would do in this situation and how to transfer and move to another group. But if you can't completely get another sponsor, and your funding is a bit shaky, you could be co-advised. So say the neglectful advisor at least has funding. You can just tell them, hey, I'm thinking about getting another co-advisor to kind of help me through some of the intellectual contributions to my work. That's possible too. You can have co-chairs on your dissertation committee and on your thesis committee. I have seen personally where students have moved groups 3 to 4 years into their graduate program, and they graduate because they've done enough work. Maybe they've done all the experiments they need to do, and they're just in the process of writing things up, submitting papers. You can do that under the guidance of someone else, and most programs understand that things just don't work out between advisors and mentees sometimes, and they won't question why you're working with this person when you've done all your research under that person. They may just help you get on out of the program. If you're looking for a co-advisor or a new advisor, try to find someone that's in that space or adjacent to that space, so that they can at least give you feedback on like technical and scholarly details. Like they can help you perhaps be corresponding author on one of your papers, help you submit to journals that are relevant to your field, and they can definitely be more of a mentor than your first advisor who neglected you. I talked about touches and how much I engage with my students. I talk to them at least 2 to 3 times a week in short intervals. That may be too much for some people, but if you're not hearing back, if they're not responding to your email, that's a problem. Now, developing the research question. I at least think that advisors should start the student off on their first project at least, so that they can learn how to do research, and maybe they have no clue about the field. I think by your third year, you should be able to generate your own research questions, but in general, your advisor gives you your first assignment. You're not left out on your own. And so I want to kind of talk about like what this sounds like to me and what I've seen over and over again. Especially for BIPOC, we sometimes experience getting ignored out of the program. Meaning you're in a program, you're in a graduate program, you're trying to do research, no one talks to you. No one gives you any feedback, no one engages with you, and you're just ignored. You're not there. Usually this icing out just naturally just encourages, it just makes you want to just drop out of the program. This isn't a retention issue. So if your advisor isn't answering your emails for no apparent reason, like for me, like I will let y'all know if I'm doing bad on email right now. All right. I'm sick. I have the, what, I just moved. But if there's no good reason why you aren't getting your emails responded to, you aren't getting the help and the structural support that you need to finish a PhD, and especially if you know that other people are getting that support, most likely you're getting iced out, and it's time to find an alternative. Yeah. And so some people may think that my advice is like hand holding, but when you start, when a graduate student starts with me, I assume they have had no research experience. And so it is my job to build that student up so that they can be successful in research. How on earth would you know? And so what kills me are programs that are seeking to diversify and make their departments and programs more inclusive and What's the E? Equitable. However, there are some gaps that need to be filled in on how to do the research. And I'm going to actually do a review of an article that came out in the Washington Post about how academic is becoming more elite, less first gen, more third and fourth generation. And so, especially if we're trying to recruit first generation scholars, we on the advising side, we may have to put in a little bit more work if we're trying to attract diverse candidates. So, red flag if you hear anybody talking about inclusivity and equity and justice and whatever, but they don't have the time to sit down with you and explain to you how things work. If they don't have the time to help you fill in that equity gap, then most likely their support is performative. It's performative to have lip service and give lip service but not do the work. So for anybody that's listening to me, and you want to diversify your lab and diversify your program, if it's too much for you to sit 15 minutes with a BIPOC, a first gen, a low income student, a disabled student, then you probably need to pipe down and pass the torch and just kind of support either by writing the grants to bring the money in to support these students, or we gotta and if I'm doing anything performative, I actually encourage the constructive criticism, because one thing I don't want to be is a hypocrite. So just to wrap up the discussion about that problematic situation, if you're not getting the mentorship you need, don't get iced out of your program. Don't let your aspiration die because you feel like you're stuck with an advisor. You're not stuck. You can find someone else. You can go to another school. You can do this. And just because you have one terrible experience doesn't mean you're not cut out for research. Fun fact. When I was a master's student going through, as a somewhat of first generation person that was taking care of a dependent sibling, I was told that I would not pass the qualifying exam based on my performance in their class, and that graduate research wasn't for me. I remember who that person is. I work with that person to this day. Hi, if you are listening to this podcast or listening to this video, just because you're going through in the moment doesn't mean that research is shut out for you, because it's not. No one knows where you're going to end up. Oh, by the way, pass the qualifying exam on the first try. All right. Next question. So we'll be here for a few more minutes because I got a few more good questions. A lot of researchers at all levels question themselves and their abilities to do research, especially incoming graduate students who may not have been exposed to doing the research or being in the field that they joined pre-PhD. How do you advise early career researchers to find the right balance of being supportive, understanding, but also making sure that progress is being made? And so by early career researchers, I think they're talking about early career PIs. So how do we remain supportive while also making sure that pretty green researchers are making progress? The second part of the question is, how do you advise to encourage the graduate students to have confidence in their abilities? Okay, so I'm going to work backwards and start with the latter part of the question. How do I advise graduate students to have confidence in their abilities? Well, yeah. So you instill confidence by being transparent with your students and not lying to them. So if they make a mistake, you have to have the tact to constructively correct them without hurting their feelings or without criticizing their character. You're just making a comment about what they're doing. The other thing that you can do to instill confidence is actually acknowledging your students' successes, small, big, whatever. Let them know when they're doing a great job. I think there's this like more older school mentality that, don't compliment your students and don't tell them they're doing a good job, which keeps them on their toes. Well, that's just not going to cut it anymore. And nowadays, people need positive reinforcement. It doesn't make you weak. It just lets you know you're on the right path. Because if you don't get any feedback, whether positive or negative, you could just be headed down in one direction in the wrong way. And then you look up 4 years later and your dissertation, it might be garbage because no one told you, no one gave you any advice. So I think just giving students constructive feedback, acknowledging successes along the way instills their confidence. Now, balancing like expecting productivity from a graduate student versus like being supportive and understanding of the fact that they just got started and it's hard. So how do I balance that? Number one, I set reasonable expectations across the board. What are some of those expectations? Well, number one, I keep my own learning curve in the back of my head. I constantly remind myself of how difficult things were that I had to do as a grad student. And I build in some buffer time to make sure that those students, my mentees, have adequate time to do what I'm asking them to do. Okay. And then I'll also recognize that maybe I'm asking them to do something that is harder than what I had to do, more difficult, requires more time. And so therefore, what I try to do is when I goal set with my mentees, and I talked about goal setting last week, you can ask them, we do this. We have what's called an ambitious timeline and a realistic timeline. So the ambitious timeline are like dates and deadlines where if you're just working 24 hours a day, you get into there's no hangups, there's no errors, no debugging. You can get those things done on the ambitious timeline. But the more realistic timeline has like a 1.5 multiplier for how long things take to get done. The realistic timeline is within my comfort zone and the graduate student's comfort zone about when we actually think things are going to get done. So that's the tangible buffer or tangible tolerance for how long I think something should get done versus how long they're actually going to get done. And then the students can pace themselves accordingly. If they want to be ambitious for the month, they can. If they want to have a good work-life balance, then they'll just go with the realistic timeline and no one's upset. I'm not upset with them, and they understand that I know that things take time. The other thing that I've never heard anyone say about this is we as the PIs, we actually have to propose reasonable project plans. Meaning, if the student is working on a sponsored project and you've promised the funding agency that you'd get this volume of work done, and you've only budgeted for a graduate student when you probably should have budgeted for a postdoc, but you were too cheap to put in the postdoc and you wanted your summer salary. So you kept your full month and budgeted for a grad student. And now you can't get the work done that you promised because you overpromised, and you're certainly going to under deliver because the plan is not feasible. Now, if someone's reading that proposal that knows how long things take, they may flag it as your budget is not commensurate with the work that you're proposing. So a lot of this starts at the proposal preparation stage where you're planning things out and you're like, all right, I've got 3 years and 300K. We're going to produce this, this, and that. Knowing gooding well that you're going to need a project extension and that it's going to take you 1 or 2 grad students to get all that work done. And so when we've overpromised, we project that onto the student and we say, get this work done, stay in the lab, stay at the computer. Don't make me look bad. So that's poor planning on our part. And so what I've started doing, or what I've always done, is just plan for like realistic outcomes such that you don't have to pressure your students. Now, in those cases where we kind of got caught up in a contract that moved extremely fast, and if not for COVID, we would have been really drowning. The sponsor expected a lot in a little bit of time. And I don't think I'm ever going to apply for something that puts that kind of strain on myself and on my students. So there you go. That's how you balance it. You balance it as a mentor by like being realistic, and then you balance it as a project planner by setting realistic goals for productivity. All right, we have a couple more questions and then we're done. So from your experience, what percent of academics genuinely care about the impact of their work? Or I'll reread it. What percent of academics are genuine / care about the impact of their work versus those who are doing the work just to get grant money and build their own reputation? That's a really an under the hood question. Like, so this question is like getting at the personal motivations of researchers and PIs. I'm going to back up from the question, the answer I have prepared. You will know them by their fruit. Okay, that is a more spiritual reference. Look at what they're doing and how they're spending their time, and you'll probably be able to see what their motivations are. Are they publishing strictly first author? Now, this is discipline specific, okay? So for disciplines that encourage graduate menteeship, where you are expected to graduate a grad student, mentor, and where teaching is important, teaching and mentoring, in those settings, are they meeting with their students? Are they training their students? Do they have sink or swim mentality? Then they probably only care about the outputs and they don't care how they get there. Now look at how people spend their time and you'll see what's important to them. Are they publishing with their students, or are they just doing collaborative work without their students? All right, so that's the marker. If their students are publishing, likely they care about their students or care about that student productivity being high. If they're not, they probably only care about advancing their own career. So the other thing that I'm going to comment on about this question is that most of the PIs and most of the professors start out pretty altruistic, meaning they care about others, they care about research. But once you get in the ivory tower and you get that name, that office with your name on it, that good view, sometimes you can get pulled into the nonsense, the self-serving nonsense, the ego stroking. And in order to get out of that or not get pulled into that is you have to constantly check your ego and check your intentions. Okay, so why did you take that seminar? Why did you take that invitation? Was it in a good vacation spot? Or could you have chosen to speak to the marginalized student group who could have, really learned from you, learn from your research? Or did you go to the destination seminar to talk to your peers who won't really learn anything from you? Yeah, just checking your ego. We all have to do it. And a good litmus test for whether or not, it's a genuine thing is, would you do it if your name didn't have to be on it? Now, when it comes to research currency, if you do put in a significant amount of work on something, your name should be on it. That's just the name of the game. But if what you're doing you truly care about and you believe in, do you think if it came down to it, you could remove yourself from the foreground and stay in the background in order to not take away from the message? Could you do it? That'll tell you whether or not you're genuinely interested in that outcome or whether you're interested in self-service and self-promotion. So I don't talk about all of the advocacy work I do all the time because it's not about me. It's about the people who the advocacy is serving. I will elevate and promote and circulate messages from others, but not everybody needs to see me in the foreground on everything. So that'll tell you whether or not what you're doing is genuine or not. Do you have to be in the foreground? But also put your name on your papers if you're working on them. All right. The last question I'm going to answer is, can you discuss why it was so important to set up your lab space the way you did with such a collaborative shared space like organization? Yeah, I thought this was a good question. I felt that having a really collaborative spatial setting was important for obvious reasons, right? Well, number one, I've been in institutions where I wasn't directly given my own space to meet with my students in like a collaborative setting, and I think that held us back. But we were able to like reserve conference space, but those rooms are constantly filled up and it's hard to get reserved space. So if you go back to episode 8 where I talk about my Berkeley experience, you'll see that I have a picture of the student workroom or the student office, researcher office. We have postdocs there too. There's a big table in the middle. It can seat about 8 comfortably and maybe 10, 12 uncomfortably. And this is where we have group meeting. So I don't have to worry about where are we going to meet? Do we have the room booked? We can just meet in there. We have a really nice monitor where we can Chromecast and everyone can see. And I hold a hybrid version of my group meeting as well. That actually gives the students a sense of ownership of their space. It lets them know that, okay, this is a team. We work here as a team. This is our home. And you can build identity around a shared physical space, like a brick and mortar space. The other thing that I had in mind for that space was K through 12 engagement. So if we have a hands-on workshop for K through 12 or even other undergraduates, we can do demonstrations in that shared space. Also, I was thinking about when benefactors may want to tour, we can sit them down in the middle of the room and we can talk to them there. So there's a space for us to host ACMEL visitors independently from any shared space in the department or shared space with other people on campus. It's working out well so far. A lot of students are hybrid this summer, but in the fall, the space gets a lot of traffic. I'm going to check and see if there's any engagement online. Okay, nothing. And yeah, that just about does it for today's office hour. I want to end by encouraging you all to enjoy your summertime if you can. Go out, go into nature, do a hike, see your family, take a vacation. If you need to check with your advisor first, do so. Be transparent about your self-care if you need to take it. And if they're unreceptive of that, see the answer to question 1. And with that, this has been great. I look forward to seeing you all next week, and be sure to catch the content that I'm planning to post to Under the Hood in a couple of days. Bye. Have a good weekend.